All right. So welcome to Nyhouse Education Center's information session on the 2024 Texas Dyslexia Handbook updates. This presentation was created to be responsive to questions that the Nyhouse Family Support Office has been receiving regarding the Texas Dyslexia Handbook. So we wanted to take a minute to share it. You can just drop in the chat, where are you joining us from tonight? And if you have any specific questions that you are bringing. All right. I see we have some San Antonio. I also saw we had some registrants from outside of Texas too. So welcome everyone. So as many of you probably know, the 2024 handbook has not been officially published yet. However, in our Family Support Office, we're already receiving many inquiries and questions about the changes because the changes are already in effect from families who are already being impacted by some of the changes that occurred with the law. And so this session was born out of a responsiveness to that. So a little about who we are for those who may not be familiar with Nyhouse Education Center. We're a nonprofit that was started in 1980 by a group of educators and parents working together to support children with dyslexia. Since then, we have expanded to provide support for literacy for all learners through our three-part mission of professional instruction for educators, referral and information for families who call us and contact us, and direct services for adult learners with dyslexia. So I'm Laura Spates. I'm the Vice President of Family Support and Adult Literacy. I'm also a certified academic language therapist and a licensed dyslexia therapist. My journey to Nyhouse started when I was still a public school teacher in a 6th through 12th grade setting, and I joined a certification program at Nyhouse to become a licensed dyslexia therapist. And I will note, right, Nyhouse offers everything from one-day classes up to our multi-year certification programs. As I began my journey, I finally started seeing results with the students that I was working with. And then an opportunity came to join the community programs team at Nyhouse. So that includes our family support office, where we have dedicated family support coordinators who respond to calls and emails from family members, all at no cost in English and in Spanish, with family members who are trying to figure out next steps for their child who struggles with reading. We also provide informational programming such as tonight's session. And then in our adult literacy program, we provide virtual and in-person evening group adult literacy classes, all at no cost and all taught by licensed dyslexia therapists. Our adult learners currently range in age from 16 to 90, but we do have some classes that are specifically open to youth age 16 to 24. So if you know of any students in that age range who would benefit, please connect with us about that. And so here you can see our contact information. You're welcome to contact us by email or by phone. This QR code will open an email on your phone with the Family Support Office email already preloaded, so you can just type us your message and click send. And so with this session, there will be some time at the end to address some questions. So throughout, we encourage you. I see the message that the chat is disabled, and I'm honestly not sure how to fix that. But I know that you can, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A, so we can still get your questions through the Q&A. If a question is more complex or individualized, then we will encourage you to email or call our Family Support Office so that we can get any additional details and make sure that we are discussing with you a solution that is tailored to what is appropriate for your needs and your family's needs. So for our website, we have lots of information for schools, educators, family members, and adult learners who want to improve their reading and spelling. This QR code will take you to the website. I'm going to show you some resources available specifically in the family section. So here you can see we have a PDF booklet that can be downloaded for free called You Can Help Your Child. It's available in English and Spanish. Lots of different information about dyslexia, a variety of different events that we offer. and then several additional PDFs available under the resources. So different resources that can be found on the internet, as well as different book options. And then one event in particular that I want to highlight is our monthly information session, which is offered virtually at no cost 2 times per month during the school year. So you can see upcoming dates that are currently available to register for. The monthly information session was created, same thing, for a parent audience, and we cover the foundations of reading, reading challenges like dyslexia, structured literacy, and all the ins and outs of the Texas dyslexia legislation. So we've had many community members who have benefited from this session that, again, happens 2 times a month during the school year. We have family members who attend, educators, medical professionals, and beyond. When families call our office, this is typically the first resource we recommend, especially if the dyslexia journey is new for a family. And so in tonight's session, we're not going to be addressing these basics. So if you are new to the world of dyslexia, then I would strongly encourage you to also join us for one of these upcoming free presentations, one of which happens to be tomorrow morning. So you could see us again bright and early tomorrow. So with this being said, let's go ahead and delve into the topic of legislation. So the first thing to note is that when we're talking about legislation, there are 3 distinct laws that we could be referring to. 2 are federal and 1 is state. So IDEA, the special education law, is federal and it ensures FAPE, which means free and appropriate public education. Section 504 is also federal and satisfies the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then we have the Texas Dyslexia law at the state level, and it specifically mandates screening, testing, and instruction. So we're focusing on the Texas law, but you're going to see a lot of language around IDEA and 504 because it impacts the language in the handbook because we need to be in compliance with those federal laws. I do want to share for anyone joining us outside of Texas that the National Center on Improving Literacy is a great resource to find information about state-specific laws and resources. On their homepage, you could click on your state on the map and learn more. All right, so what has actually been updated? So last year in 2023, a Texas House bill was passed, which impacted dyslexia evaluation, identification, and instruction. This law is already in effect. These dyslexia handbook updates reflect the changes to that law. The updates, or these changes to the handbook, were approved in April 2024, so very recently, last month. And then this revised 2024 handbook, the final version should be published sometime this summer, is my current understanding. So we're not going to go line by line through the handbook. Rather, we are focusing on the key updates that would be the most important to be aware of and that align with where we have been receiving most of our questions from the families who have contacted us. And so we have grouped the questions into 3 general categories. You have dyslexia evaluation and determination, the impacts for students currently receiving dyslexia services, and who can deliver the services. This slide names the main resources where information was pulled from. So as already stated, the 2024 Dyslexia Handbook is in the draft form is what's available to us now. And so you're going to see it cited on the slides as TDH 2024 draft. I do want to note one of the changes in the final approval was that the FAQ, the frequently asked questions appendix, will actually be separate from the handbook. And this was made so that TEA can revise the appendix without having to go back to the State Board of Education every time. And so some of the information that we're presenting tonight is from that FAQ appendix. So while the page numbers are accurate for the draft version, they will likely change. The second resource, and again, you have the QR code where you can pull it up yourself as well, is the Guidance for the Comprehensive Evaluation of Specific Learning Disabilities, which was published in October 2023. This guidance document serves as a resource for local education agencies and multidisciplinary teams as they work collaboratively to evaluate students suspected of having a specific learning disability, which includes dyslexia and dysgraphia. And then at NIHouse, we created a 2-pager frequently asked question, which all attendees will be emailed after this session. It's going to cover the same questions that we're about to dig into. And I do want to acknowledge Michelle Reeves, the Texas State Dyslexia Coordinator, who provided some helpful suggestions around what we included. And then lastly, on a couple slides, we made examples to help illustrate some key points, again, with parents in mind. And I will make sure and state when it is an example that was created in-house. So let's talk about the updates related to dyslexia evaluation and determination. So if dyslexia is suspected, then the referral must be made to special education, and the family must be provided with a form to sign. In this new form, most of the information is not new, but we're going to look at a few pieces of it because it has really good information. So I'm going to show you a couple of snips of the form, which is available in many different languages. If you start at the top, you can see it emphasizes special education is a service, not a place. And then it gives an overview of the steps to begin the special education process in the blue box. And then at the bottom, you have additional resources as well. And then on the next page, it breaks down each of those 5 steps from that blue box into more details. And importantly, it includes a timeline for your reference. So for example, if you as the parent make a referral request for an evaluation in writing, super important to always make your requests in writing, then the school has 15 school days to respond, also in writing. If the school agrees to proceed with an evaluation, then in step 2, you would be asked to sign a consent. Once the consent is signed, that's going to trigger the next timeline, which in most cases is that the evaluation must be completed within 45 school days. In step 3, I want to draw your attention to the fact that the evaluation is done by a group of trained professionals. And it explicitly states in the first bullet that if dyslexia is suspected, then someone similar to a licensed dyslexia therapist or with high knowledge of dyslexia should be involved. And we'll have more details related to that in later slides. Step 4 is also very important. The admission, review, and dismissal, almost always you're just going to hear that referred to as the ARD. That meeting includes you as the parent or guardian and those professionals with special training on the suspected disability. So if dyslexia is what is suspected, then a dyslexia professional should be a part of those discussions. Together at this meeting, where you as the parent or guardian are a voting member, all the meeting participants should discuss and determine together if there is a disability plus the need for special education services. You and the professional with expertise in dyslexia should be a part of making this determination. And then in step 5, if the ARD committee, which again includes you, has determined that the child is eligible, then an individualized education plan, almost always just going to be referred to as an IEP, will be created. You and the dyslexia professional should participate in the development of the IEP, and ultimately, you as the parent or guardian can agree or disagree to the services that the child will receive. The next section of this form explains how the process works once your child is receiving services. And again, the QR code is here. You can review this document on your own. I just want to draw your attention to a couple key points. So you should receive progress reports at least once each grading period, and we'll talk about this in another slide too. If you don't understand what the progress report is telling you, please request a meeting to discuss it. Make sure you understand what that progress report is saying. And then next, while the ARD must meet at least annually, at least one time a year, you as the parent guardian and a voting member of that ARD committee can request a meeting at any time. And then the last page of the document, which is, I didn't include a snip here, but it outlines rights and next steps if there is a disagreement about the decisions, and it provides a glossary of some helpful terminology. So let's look a little further into who that dyslexia professional in the room should be. The revised handbook states that when dyslexia is suspected, a person with specific knowledge related to dyslexia must be involved in the discussions. And that pertains to both determining eligibility, as well as if it's a discussion around if the student continues to be eligible or should be considered to be exited from the program. And so the handbook lists that the number 1 option would be a licensed dyslexia therapist. That is someone who has completed at least 200 hours of training plus 700 supervised teaching hours. The second option would then be the next most advanced dyslexia-related certification. And they state that that could be someone who has received a certification, and in a couple slides, I'll show you a slide that lists all the potential certifications, or someone who has received training from one of those accrediting bodies. And so that's listed out as MSLEC, ALTA, IDA, OG, or Wilson. And again, I'll show a graphic with those acronyms. And then the last option, number 3, would be someone who meets training requirements, which they list as having training through the Texas Dyslexia Academy, the guidance for the comprehensive evaluation of SLD training, and documented training and current assessments. So let's look really quickly at what is this multidisciplinary team, or MDT, that the dyslexia therapist should be a part of. If you remember back to step 2, where you as the parent gave consent for the evaluation to happen, at that point, an MDT, a multidisciplinary team, is formed, and this team assumes the responsibility of following all evaluation procedures. The members can vary depending on suspected areas of disability and the need for specific skill sets. But the Texas Specific Learning Disability Eligibility Criteria states that the determination of whether a student suspected of having an SLD is a student with a disability must be made by, and you can see it in the graphic, the student's parents. So you as the parent or guardian, you are a part of this MDT, their regular teacher, evaluation personnel, and other individuals with special expertise, such as a dyslexia therapist. And then note this SNP under best practice. If the child is receiving intervention in an area, then the interventionist should be part of that decision-making team. And then this is on page 53 of the handbook, and it just goes back to what I mentioned earlier. So if you were like listening to LDT or some of these other certifying bodies like Wilson or Orton, it actually lists out all the different training levels and possible certifications or licensures that a dyslexia interventionist in Texas could have. So this is in page 53 of the Texas Dyslexia Handbook. And this one has been there, but it's just a good one to be reminded that it's there. All right, now let's look at information that might be helpful to evaluators, but also helpful to you as the parent or guardian to know when you're advocating for your child, because again, you're a part of this multidisciplinary team. So a key takeaway from these quotes is that there's not one cutoff or profile for dyslexia. And it's not required that a student have a cognitive weakness correlated with an academic weakness. And then that second bullet point in the middle is one that I'm going to elaborate on a little bit. So it says, keep in mind that a deficit in one area of phonological awareness, just talking about the awareness of sounds, can limit reading progress, and consider discrete skills versus composite scores when drawing conclusions. So it reminds us to look at discrete or individual subtest scores versus composite scores, which is when multiple scores are grouped together. And so I'm going to show an example of this because if you're not super familiar with educational testing, it might not make a lot of sense. So this slide is one that was created in-house. And again, it's just meant to show an example. So it was created using the Comprehensive Test of Phonological Processing, or the CTOP, which is a common assessment used in dyslexia screening and testing. And again, I don't want you to focus so much on the test, but rather just understanding the difference between composite and discrete subtests, because this example could apply to any evaluation, not just this one. And so in reviewing the data, if we were presented with just the composite scores, which is what you can see right here, composite score for phonological awareness and for phonological memory, it looks pretty good. The student scored within the average range. And so at this level, from one data point, okay, we're doing pretty well. However, you all know that we should never make a determination based off one data point. And we should examine the discrete or the individual subtest scores that combine to turn into that composite score. And so we would ask to see that if we're not provided with that. And now we have those discrete or individual subtests. And we noticed, whoa, there are some discrepancies there, right? There's some areas of weakness. And it could be possible that even though that composite score was average, it might have only been average by 1 point, right? And so if it's this or any test like this really was used to gather data, all we know at this point is that really we just need to gather more data to investigate why these discrepancies are happening. And then this is another graphic that goes a little bit broader, but it reminds us that every profile of dyslexia is different. So you will see areas of strength and weakness, but it can and does vary. So the first box highlights that you will see strengths in certain areas and per the second box, you will see deficits in reading words in isolation, decoding unfamiliar words, and or reading fluency and spelling. That and or is key. You do not have to check every single box to have dyslexia. And then the third box shows that the child may have deficits in phonemic or phonological awareness, rapid naming, and or orthographic processing. So again, it's that and or that's key. Every box does not have to be checked to have dyslexia. And then this is not new to the handbook, but it kind of goes along the same lines and it bears repeating. These are the suggested questions to consider when making a determination around dyslexia. And so if you'll notice the sentence in parentheses at the end of the second bullet, average phonological scores alone do not rule out dyslexia. Okay, we've got to look at the whole picture and we can't make a determination just based off of one data point. And then lastly, just another graphic that clearly reinforces the need for a variety of data gathering and to not make any determinations based off one piece of data. The other important point to keep in mind is that the purpose of a full individual evaluation is more than just identifying a specific learning disability. So if dyslexia was suspected, it's more than just identifying that the student has dyslexia. It also has to be clear how the disability, so in our example, how dyslexia affects the student's access to and progress in the general curriculum. This is important to keep in mind, and we're going to look at some concrete examples that relate to this in the next section. So let's look at the updates that relate to students who are currently receiving services for dyslexia. This is a key change. So prior to 2023, students could receive dyslexia intervention through a 504 plan or an IEP through special education. However, with the changes in the law, because evidence-based dyslexia programs and instructions are specially designed instruction, dyslexia intervention is now only going to be available to students served through IDEA, which means served through special education services. So the actual intervention can only come through special education services now. So what still applies to 504 then? So 504 plans for students who have dyslexia would provide accommodations. So things like extended time, audiobooks, text-to-speech options. Accommodations can be very helpful, but it's just important to remember they're not addressing the core issue, right? It's the same way, right? Like my glasses, they're an accommodation that help me to see, but they're not correcting my eyesight. They're an accommodation. Dyslexia intervention is what addresses the core issue to help a child with dyslexia who needs to learn to read. And so a child on a 504 plan will no longer receive dyslexia intervention since that is specially designed instruction and has to come through special education. However, the handbook is very clear that no student should just stop receiving services. So if you have a child who's currently receiving dyslexia intervention through a 504 plan, then a meeting should be held. And if the student needs to continue dyslexia intervention, then they should be referred for a full individual and initial evaluation, or an FIIE, which we will discuss on the next slide. So some important things to note here. If the student is currently on the 504 plan and still needs dyslexia intervention, then the school should refer them for a full individual and initial evaluation. Second point is key. During the process of obtaining that, the student should continue receiving services. So if a student's receiving services, that should not stop. And then just a note that if the child was recently evaluated, the handbook acknowledges that that multidisciplinary team, which includes input and data from the student's parent, you might determine that informal data might be the only items necessary to include along with the recent evaluation report. Now, this is where it's really important to pay attention, because once you start reevaluating a student who has already received some dyslexia intervention, you've got to look at the data through that lens. So let's start with what the state is looking for when making a determination for a specific learning disability, or SLD, which again includes dyslexia. So this goes back to the point that we made earlier, that it's not just about identifying if dyslexia is present or not. In this sentence, the state describes a child who has been provided with instruction appropriate for their age or grade level, but they're not achieving adequately for their age, or they're not meeting state-approved grade level standards in one or more of 8 areas of achievement. Right? Here are 8 areas. Most often related to dyslexia, we'll see impacts with written expression and those 3 reading categories. But as we previously stated, right, every profile of dyslexia is different. So it could be a variety. So if we think for a minute, I just want you to think about data that's formal, informal. If you were a part of this MDT team, if you were a part of determining if a child both has dyslexia and has that need to get support so that they can meet the grade level standards, what data sources would you want to see to help determine if they were or weren't achieving adequately for their age or state-approved grade level standards? Okay, here are some of the examples provided by TEA in their evaluation guidance document. You can see informal category, which includes parent information and interview, as well as observations from school and home. Curriculum-based, which can include things like running records and progress monitors. Norm referenced, which would be standardized measures such as achievement tests and cognitive tests. And then criterion referenced, which can include things like the state tests like STAR, and then also, when you're in high school, the SAT and SAT. So lots of options of data that can help to inform this decision. And here is another graphic highlighting, again, just the variety of evaluation data that can be used, including information provided by parents, including right here, right, outside evaluations if that's relevant. Now, when reassessing, again, those effects of the intervention have to be considered because dyslexia is not outgrown. And I thought this quote by Dr. Shaywitz just really put it well. And this is in the handbook too. One of the most common errors in teaching a student with dyslexia to read is to withdraw prematurely the instruction that seems to be working. Okay, we want to make sure that they've made it all the way through and they're set up for success both now and in the future. And so this is another in-house example, but I just wanted to give an example of what this could look like, right? So again, if we go back to that example, let's say in the initial evaluation, we got back that composite score and the term, it was the scores were considered poor. I still want to see those subtest scores though, because I know that it's important to look at all the pieces of data, and yep, pretty consistently there. And then now with this, this child has been receiving services through a 504 plan. And so now with the new law, if they're going to continue receiving services, they need an evaluation to determine if they will qualify for special education services. So an evaluation is done. And in that reevaluation, that composite score comes back averaged. What do I know? Well, I am absolutely going to ask, well, I'd like to see those subtest scores, please. Okay, so I'm seeing we still have some discrepancies. And this data does not mean that the child does not have dyslexia. Rather, right, it's showing me that the intervention is working. We are seeing growth, which is great. And again, we can't just look at one piece of data. We need to look at the whole picture and bring in multiple measures of data. Even if every single one of those subtests came back saying average, we still need to look at all of the data holistically. And again, it just goes back to that, yes, they may have shown growth on the CTOP or another exam, but how are they doing in these grade level areas? How are they doing on state assessments? If schools have other assessments like the MAP or things like that, are they scoring within the average grade level ranges? So it's very important to consider for our students who are going to be retested and have already received intervention. And then this resource even says the emphasis on a reevaluation may not be the continued identification of a disability condition. It might shift to a detailed description of how the disability continues to impact access and progress in the general curriculum. All right, now take a step back for a minute. Because remember that first step is asking for the parental consent for that full individual initial evaluation. If the parent doesn't provide the consent, then the student will no longer be eligible to receive the dyslexia therapy through 504. So that's the one case where the intervention would stop if the parent does not provide consent. In the second bullet, they do note that a student could receive services if it is something that is available to all students. So if there's a tutoring program that's available to all students, but they specifically state that that would not include the dyslexia intervention program. And so as we noted earlier, a student with dyslexia could still receive accommodations such as extended time, audiobooks, etc., through a 504 plan. And that could absolutely be enough for some students who don't need the intervention. It's just important to be aware as the parent or guardian and make an informed choice based on what your child needs, both for where they are right now and in the future. And then these final few are just some questions that we've received pretty often, so we included them, even though, again, not everything with these is completely new with this update. But again, it's always good to have a refresher. So instructors are not required to be certified through special education unless special education is their actual job position. The handbook does specify that they should be fully trained in the adopted instructional materials, and that the Literacy Achievement Academy does not satisfy the training requirement, right? Because we want to know that the person working with our child has been thoroughly trained in the materials that they're using. Computer programs can supplement instruction, but they do not replace the need for a knowledgeable, trained teacher. The handbook is very clear on this. I will also add that if your child is using a computer program to supplement, ensure that you understand what levels that program was created for, what level your child is at, and make sure that they've been appropriately placed. For example, a program may have been created for secondary readers around a 5th through 8th grade level, and your child might be a 7th grader, but if they're reading at the 3rd grade level, then that program's not yet appropriate for them because we have to meet students at their reading stage. So this is another area where if that is being used, you want to ask questions and make sure you know that the right choice is being made. And then this is part of the update, and it's the only one that's not in question form. But just to note and be aware that progress reports are now required one time per grading period in relation to the dyslexia program. And again, if you are receiving a report and you're not sure what that means, please request a meeting to make sure you understand. We need to know, is my child making adequate progress? If they are, excellent. If they're not, then we need to come back as an ARD meeting and have a discussion about what else might need to happen to make sure that they're making that adequate progress. And so before we open up for some Q&A questions, just where you can find some additional resources. So if you go to our NIHouse inbox, our NIHouse homepage, if you scroll down, you can sign up for a variety of listservs, but the family information and events is where we send out information, updates related to handbook changes and things going on in Texas. And then secondly, as I mentioned, Michelle Reeves, who's the state dyslexia coordinator, she wasn't able to join us tonight, but she did say that if anyone has any specific questions, that she would be happy to answer them. And you can email her here at sped@tea.texas.gov.